I felt it necessary to do a commentary on cultural identity and what that actually means in 2020. Cultural identity is defined as the identity or feeling of belonging to a group. It's also a part of a person's self-concept and self-perception, and it is related to the nationality, ethnicity, religion, social class, generation, locality, or any kind of social group that has its own distinct culture. Wow, that's rich. It says a lot, and it means a lot. Cultural issues cover such a wide range of concerns, including race, of course. Look at what's happening worldwide with cultural unrest. You know, we use this term culture as a term that really refers to our beliefs and our customs that are really taken in by a particular group. We look at culture as how this identity is so important, as how it contributes to our well-being. When our identity is threatened, it really causes confusion. Identifying with a particular culture gives us, as individuals, a feeling of belonging, and it gives us security. It also provides us with access to social networks, and it provides a support system for our shared values and our aspirations. Wow. Our cultural identity is actually, I believe, in a crisis state. We find young individuals that are looking for ways that they can take part and be understood within their youth culture. However, young people find that they are part of a multiple culture that exists, having to do with 5 generations currently that we're dealing with. We're dealing with migration from individuals coming into, for example, other countries that are looking for a better way of life. We have generational distance having to do with 5 generations, such as the traditionalists that are still living, that were part of World War I and II. We have the baby boomers. We have individuals that are millennials and the Generation X and Generation Z and Generation Y. We have the culture of interracial marriages within our region. We also see that our young people are judged for not adhering to cultural values, such values that are held by a particular community. They're often being lost right now, causing extreme stress and confusion, where they're trying to fit in and to make sense of what's actually going on. We have very vast examples of traditional culture having to do with the integration of languages and festivals and rituals and ceremonies. We have holidays and pastimes, foods and architecture. So how do we cultivate and maintain areas that help us identify to our individual culture? How do we maintain those rituals of tradition that are near to our hearts? How do we manage conflict between philosophies and social practice? How do we identify with gender and the changes within gender identity? We have a lot of information. However, we still seek a lot of answers. we look to ways to maintain our culture. and our identity. We seek for ways to stay in touch with people, near and far. We seek to join groups and clubs and networks in order to maintain our identity of our old culture. We seek traditions to hold on to them, to identify with those rich traditions and cultures without consumerism. We look to share our culture with new friends and old friends as we emerge and share with colleagues. We seek to connect our cultural identity through volunteering in service and community and global organizations. So what is culture? Well, culture has to do with all of those characteristics and the knowledge that we know of a particular group of people. Identifying who we are, as I refer to, how do we self-identify? How do we encompass languages, religion, social habits, music, and arts? Our culture is derived of values, beliefs that are our guiding principles. Let's find ways to maintain this culture and our cultural identity. We know that for many, identity crises are at hand. We have to learn to maintain change and endure these big changes and stressors in life due to factors that are often beyond our control. Those that are aging, those that are maintaining careers, those that are maintaining and raising children to be respected throughout society, within schools, education systems, within work. How do we maintain? We need to resolve to finding successful resolutions in order to overcome these crises and to continue the progress in developmental stages where we are able to continue to instill trust and autonomy and initiate good traits that have been derived from our childhood. You know, there are different types of cultural hierarchies that exist. There's that clan culture. There's that advocacy culture. There's the marketing culture. There's that hierarchy of culture and status. We need to rely on the systems of beliefs and behaviors in order that we recognize and acknowledge the diversity of groups within our society and within organizations, and acknowledge their importance and their values as they make this world into a socio-cultural global force. We need to continue to encourage and enable others. Moreover, find ways to continue to contribute to an inclusive society, inclusive cultural identity. that will empower us throughout the 21st century. We have to rely on distinguishing our character, developing our personalities as individuals, understanding that although we may have beliefs of a individualistic cultural world, we must learn collectivism values of helping one another within group mentality in order to survive the conditions to establish ourselves and self-identify the beauty of the human condition that is inspired by cultural tradition. Let's do a review of the dynamics of cultural identity. We've already defined cultural identity having to do with the values and norms and beliefs and guiding principles and that guide our identity towards our culture. However, within that, we have to look at certain areas of rites of passage. We have to look at the material culture and truly identify values and norms in order to understand why they are so important and so rich. We have to look at the patterns that exist. Additionally, the language, the art and the culture, the pastimes. We have to look at specifically identifying the history in order to focus on the future. For example, there are several types of culture. We know that there's folk culture, pop culture or popular culture. With regard to folk culture, we reflect back to areas having to do with styles and traditions that occur within the folklore and the folk ways and mores and even taboos that exist. We also have in folk culture a small area that usually incorporates certain ideas and styles. We also have popular culture, which is more a large area that is focused upon having to do with urban trends that are quickly adapted to and then often change again quickly. We find that there's a lot of monetary benefit that comes out of pop culture. We find that individuals are looking for ways to fit in and to feel a part of having to do with pop culture and music and dance and the arts. A way of self-expression really comes out of pop culture. We know within the sports industry, popular pastimes such as sports of basketball, football, soccer are also derived out of this pop culture, music, dance, forms of dance that help to transcend global culture and exchange. Often out of the popular culture, we do see a material culture that begins to arise, where individuals locally are able to look into promoting art and community and artifacts and manifests that contribute the ideas of art form, tradition, foods on a local level to be exchanged. This term we refer to is looking into commodities, whereas commodification starts to transpire, enabling money to be made by viewing authentic cultural exchange having to do with folk music, folk art, popular trends, localization. All these perceived cultures make up this globalization of which we all often strive to find ways to assimilate our ideas into accepting new cultures. Assimilation. It's really defined as when those times that people tend to lose their original culture and cultural traits. For example, remember we look back into the formation of the Western world. For example, the United States. North America was first inhabited by Native Indians. Over time, they were forced to assimilate into being a part of adapting new cultures. Cultural appropriation. For example, what the Indians had to adapt to a new culture to fit in order to get jobs and to be looked upon as a part of this new world. We look at old traditions such as the Amish and the Hittites that had strong beliefs in wanting to keep old world out of their communities. For example, where the Amish refuses to adapt to new technology, whereas the Hittites, although they maintained their traditional values, they did assimilate some of the technology in order to fit into local environments. Culture is far-reaching. We look at terms of neo-groups and neo-localism that seek to maintain their originality. We look at little ethnic groups having to do with small communities such as Chinatown and Little Havana that help to provide ethnic diversity within neighborhoods so individuals feel a part of, that they can adapt some of their old world traditions on a local basis. It also inspires cultural traits of commodification. Well, oftentimes, commodification tends to exploit cultures when it's not interpreted authentically. We look at places like Disney and Disney World and Epcot Center where they try to maintain culture so individuals can be inspired by local tradition and global traditions in order that individuals can reflect upon cultural values. So we can look and appreciate customs and rituals and traditions that reinforce our guiding principles. It allows us to take a closer look at cultural identity and human behavior as we have a way of being able to share ideas and see areas that explain the good in cultures and hopefully allows us not to judge only the bad in cultures that we don't understand. These shared ideas help us to maintain cultural values. They help us to form rules and to pass on our general values from generation to generation. You know, young kids start learning these values from birth up until 10 years old. You know, within that short period of time, this is where the cultural values are instilled in individuals for a lifetime. These values, of course, they influence our views. They help us to incorporate into groups and group membership. They help us to maintain that human connection. Unfortunately, there's also that human behavior of forming groups that are considered the in groups and the out groups. That's where it begins to get a little problematic. The in group focuses on looking for similarities in individuals. They tend to consider themselves a part of. They take care of one another. They support each other. They offer benefits. However, on the flip side, they tend to push out those that are not the same, that don't have the same shared values and beliefs, and consider the out group as outsiders. This is where we must look into diversity and embracing the difference of others. Group ties can be beneficial. Group ties are formulated nationally within our ethics and beliefs, our religious practices, global regions, within our families as well. The funny thing about it is that our values are often hidden from individuals. We tend to share our values with those groups that have like-minded interests. Moreover, we know that values influence our human behavior, most times to our own benefit individually. We look at cultural language. We have to try to better understand the values of our language in sending messages as we encode and decode messages from verbal and nonverbal means. We have to understand that individuals send messages that some of us may not understand thoroughly. We must learn how to listen. We must learn how to decipher high context levels of communication where we use many words to convey our message, such as in the individualistic culture. Whereas those that use few words typically come out of a collectivism type of mentality where we use a low context level of expressing ourselves, whereas yes truly means yes and no means no. Listening is paramount. We need to really understand and ask the question, even though I'm speaking, have you really heard me? Wow, listening and language go hand in hand. How do we hear others? How do we communicate well? How do we decode information? These are all part of identifying our identity culturally. Have you ever considered how important cultural architecture is? Wow, it has such a deep-rooted meaning. What is the meaning socially when we look at a different building and how it's constructed? Why do some nations construct buildings one way and others tend to just live in huts? They all have a meaning and they all have value. Cultural architecture refers to the style of the construction. What influences it? How is it influenced culturally with providing the needs of sustainability and safety within communities, keeping our environment strong, maintaining the functionability of the construction of architecture? What is our cultural architectural makeup having to do with the vernacular and why we need this everyday way of communicating style and functionability geographically? Cultural architect. How do we preserve it? How do we maintain historical finds? How do we maintain rural decision-making areas where these decisions of how buildings were constructed to adjust to lifestyles? Historical cities that are willing to destroy and break down buildings in order to make way for new and more modern. How do we conserve historical finds? What about future development? How do we protect our artifacts? All of this has to do with the makeup of our cultural identity and the roles that our environment truly plays, having to do with how we seek cultural identity in places, in people, and in things. What about the pastimes of culture? What about those cultural norms that take place? Cultural pastimes help us to maintain peace and tranquility. Additionally, they help to form these norms and the rules and the laws. Pastimes help to support our cultural structure, maintaining our food choices, traditions, and holidays and celebrations. Within pastimes, we have to find ways to maintain health standards. We have to try to celebrate attitudes that come out of the importance of traditional pastimes. We have to look at the social graces and adaptability having to do with why it's important to focus on holiday traditions. We have to understand how to maintain being kind to others. We have to also understand what drives systems of holiday traditions that also contribute to financial stability and economics. We have to understand the differences in gender and gender roles. We have to understand what it means to tolerate things that are important to others and to intentionally be inclusive. We have to understand good customer service and cultural manifestation to find ways that sustainability will continue to manifest in order to maintain relational roles that are important to each and every one of us. We need cultural identity in order to make decisions on establishing lifestyle needs and maintaining order in our systems. We need to find new ways of thinking about why our values are important, finding ways of thinking why our systems are important, finding ways of maintaining thinking strategies that are important. Yes, it is important for us all to maintain this rites of passage, to understand that cultural identity has areas that identify things and materialism and ideas of non-materialism. We need to embrace folkways, mores, and understand taboos. We need to understand difference, and we need to understand moral intent. We need to understand how our values and our norms and our beliefs must be sustainable. Hopefully, we can all make some decisions to be willing to change and make a difference. Thank you so much for listening today. This is Dr. Kim Eagles. Let's keep cultural identity alive and well.